In a world where cats take the place of their owners, in a world where cats are unified together, this is where my tale takes place. The story begins with a certain feline, Fluffykins. But for time's sake, we'll just call her Fluffy. Anywho, Fluffy had a very tough life. She had been beaten down and discarded from all the toys in life. Even her mother had refused to nurse her after birth and threw her in an orphanage. You see, Fluffy wasn't any ordinary cat. No one really understood why, but she just attracted bad things. And with that in mind, I begin. Fluffy was walking home one day after kitty work. Oh, cats. Oh, cats. Where was I?
Fluffy, the cat?
Oh, yes, I apologize, child. Anywho, she realized it was getting darker, much quicker than normal, so she took a shortcut into a dark alley. As you can expect, she'd walked straight into cat-gang territory. Oh no! The members emerged from the shadows surrounding poor Fluffy. They began to push her back and forth, laughing maniacally until one pushed just a tad too hard and she went flying top speed toward the recipient at the other end. Her head collided with the chest. He fell on his back, one of the most disgraceful acts a cat can ever do. The crowd gasped and all eyes turned to the male that had fallen. He immediately leapt back onto his paws and chillingly stared at Fluffy. Rage was in his eyes. She began to sputter words, apologizing again and again, but to no avail. He slowly prowled over towards her, pulling out his claws. I will leave out the gruesome details, but after he was done, the crowd dispersed, leaving her broken, poor body all alone outside. All she remembered after that was raindrops and then darkness. She awoke in the same place that she had passed out. No one had helped her. No one had even taken the time to ask if she was okay. She tried to get up on her paws, but they gave out from under her as she gasped in pain, collapsing back to the floor. As she fell back down, her jaw smacked the cold pavement. The blackness surrounded her again. Once again she awoke, however not in the same place. Now she lay in a warm bed, but she was shivering. She looked around. Where am I? She thought aloud.
My home,
said a disembodied voice from outside the room. A head appeared in the corridor, masked by darkness. He slowly approached, escaping the darkness as it unveiled the most horrifying face she had ever seen. One eye was missing, the other terribly cross-eyed. He was missing one of his fangs, and the other was protruding over a gimp lip. Fluffy stifled a scream. He was carrying a mug in his paw, and without a word, he lifted up towards her lips and said,
open.
She wasn't sure why, but she complied without hesitation. The warm liquid rushed down her chest, and the shivers instantly vanished. Once the mug was empty, he gently put it back down and pulled up a chair next to her bed. He opened up a book, put a monocle over his good eye, and began to read. Fluffy lay in silence, but only for a moment. How did I get here? She blurted, no longer able to maintain silence. The male sighed, closed his book, and slowly looked up.
I was walking home from the grocery store and decided to take a shortcut. Lo and behold, as I walked down the alley, I find your body. You must have been lying there for many, many days. I dropped my bags and rushed over to see if you were okay. You were pretty beaten up, so I picked you up and carried you home. I've been trying to nurse you back to health for the past week.
He nodded towards the bandages around her chest.
You've been asleep for a very long time, you know.
She looked into his face with admiration in her eyes. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, mister. Why, I don't even know your name.
Call me Waffles, Fluffy.
She looked aghast. How do you know my name? He fingered her collar tag. She laughed out loud at her idiocy. Well, Mr. Waffles, how can I ever repay you? His command was simple.
You can never forget me.
A few days passed. Or was it weeks? or months. No, it was definitely days. Definitely days. Where was I?
For God's sake, Mrs. Munch, the cats!
Oh, yes. And Fluffy's health was getting better and better, until one day she pounced out of bed and rushed down the hallway to the living room. "Waffles!" she exclaimed excitedly. "I can walk again! I can walk again!" He looked up at her and smiled with his gimp lip and crooked tooth.
I see that. I think it is time you flew the nest.
She spent a few more days with him, then gathered her few belongings and walked towards the door. They said their teary goodbyes, and as she was about to leave, he grabbed her shoulder and said,
Keep your promise.
She looked him in the eye and said, "I could never forget you." And Fluffy kept her promise, at least for a little while. She would constantly visit him, but then the visits became further and further in between. Fluffy was busy. She had her own life, her own challenges to tackle. He didn't want the visits to seem like a burden or a chore. So one day, he sat her down and told her that a call here and there would suffice. And call him she did, constantly at first. Calling was easy, and he was happy just to hear her voice. But then the calls became further and further in between, until they would only come seldom, once every 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. But he understood and was happy, until one day, on the day when Fluffy was supposed to call him, she was just too tired. She couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she curled up on the bed and fell asleep. The last thoughts she had were, "I'll call him tomorrow." Those were the thoughts that entered her mind every night for 2 weeks, until finally, not even the thought of Mr. Waffle. He had been forgotten. 2 years had passed, and a lot had occurred to our Fluffy. The constant bad luck had went away. She was very successful, the vice president of a catnip company, and climbing through the ranks. She was happy, well, almost. Something was missing. She just didn't know what. On this certain day that we reunite with Fluffy, she awoke with a strange, nostalgic feeling. The day was a special day, but why? She got up, did her normal grooming, and got ready for work, walked outside, and checked her mail. All bills except for one musty envelope. It was from a person that sounded so familiar. She just couldn't put her paw on it. She opened the envelope and pulled out a tear-stained piece of paper with just 2 words on it.
You forgot.
The words echoed in her mind and began to repeat themselves to the beat of her heart. The memories all flooded back. How could she, after all he had done for her? How could she have forgotten? The letter fell from her grasp to the ground as she dashed down the street toward Mr. Waffle's neighborhood. The constant chant going off in her mind, increasing more feverishly as she got closer and closer. She found his house, flew down the walkway, and burst through the door. No one in the living room. She sprinted into the kitchen. No one there as well. Finally, she checked the bedroom and gasped the sight before her. There lay his body, one arm spread out towards the door, the other grasping his chest. She looked into his good eye. It was glazed over and staring back at her. She knew then, looking into his eye, that she had failed and would never again be free of her curse.